In any discussion about Welsh independence, there is a tendency for many people to think of Wales as incapable of running its own affairs, incapable of being a real country, both from people opposed to the idea of Wales as a nation, but also within national movements in Wales itself. People often mention the funding gap, the fact that Wales spends more than it gains in taxes and must therefore be subsidised by England. This is, of course, nonsense. Nearly every country spends out more than it gains in taxes. That is the concept of national debt. The establishment fixes the figures it releases, judging corporation tax on where companies are registered, often London rather than where they are situated, often leaving out VAT for some reason, road tax, shipping taxes, and basically any tax they can in order to protect and extol the establishment, to stop people questioning the status quo, because where would that lead? And that is before you consider the enormous amounts that Wales would gain by not having to spend money on Trident, through keeping an army more in keeping with the size of the country, and gaining additional money from water through corporate taxes if the companies were not nationalised. So there are some basic facts which perhaps ought to be better known. The trade surplus of a country is a good indication of the health of its economy. The difference between imports and exports. A country with a trade surplus is effectively producing in value all goods needed for its own population, plus more, which surplus it can export for profit. This is a good thing. A country with a trade deficit is effectively not producing in value enough goods for its own people and has to pay to import the deficit. This, as you can imagine, is not so good. According to figures produced by the Government of the United Kingdom, at the end of the first quarter of 2016, this was the United Kingdom's position. Its exports were worth £277.6 billion, whilst its imports were worth £396.7 billion. That is a trade deficit, which is a bad thing. A trade deficit of £119.1 billion. If we look at Wales, Wales's exports were worth £12.1 billion, whilst its imports were worth £7 billion. That is a trade surplus, which is a good thing. A trade surplus of £5.1 billion. The next fact concerns how rich Welsh people are. People often say that Wales is too poor. Well, per capita, Wales would be positioned as the 17th richest country out of Europe's 50 countries. But that is missing the main point, really. If Wales is poor, it is poor as part of the UK. We are not richer in this country because the UK is ranked 16th. If you want to see what a country ranked as 17th would look like, well, look out the window, because you are living in one. But remember that that independent country would be in charge of its own affairs, not paying for Trident, paying a smaller amount for a smaller, more appropriately sized and constituted army, able to treat its soldiers better during and after their service to their country. And despite our relative wealth, poverty is still a problem in parts of Wales. Independent, we would be able to use our wealth to better address the problems of our country, which is not being addressed by Westminster. Another argument against independence is often that, all our resources have gone. Well, they haven't. We used to have more, a hell of a lot more, which were used to profit greedy individuals from the 19th century onwards. Even in the 1970s, Wales was still second in the world as a producer of coal per head of the population. But certain individuals still thought then that Wales should not control its own destiny. Yes, we had a particularly rich source of resources. Yes, they were largely wasted, whilst we were part of the United Kingdom. But just because we have fewer resources than we had, that simply means we are in the same position as most other countries. Most other countries did not need their independence funded by an enormous coalfield or an enormous oil field. They simply seize independence as they are, and as we can. But just to stress again, most countries are not run on the basis that they sit on an enormous coal or oil field. Their resources are much the same as ours. It is often said that after leaving Europe, we are losing out on funding, so now is not the time for independence. On a straight add-up money we get from Europe and take away what we give to it, Wales comes out in front. That's true. Whether the money was spent in a way or the best way to benefit Wales's infrastructure, and was it worth any downsides, are arguments which are not really relevant for this particular point. The additional money from Europe would not have financed our independence. It is not a case of being in a pub at the end of the night and trying to borrow 10 pence off your mates for another pint. Go on, just another couple of £100 million and we can have an independent country. Approximately £80 per year per head of the population is a lot of money, but it is not enough to finance independence. Without that, we have the wealth, we have the resources, and above all, we have the people to support our country.